Atwin. So now I'm going to say just a few words about our Fredericton MP, Jenica Atwin, and she's going to introduce Minister Fraser, the Minister of Immigration, Refugee and Citizenship. Oromocto and Fredericton are Jenica's home, where she grew up and where she chooses to raise her children. In October 2019, she was given the honor of being your Member of Parliament for Fredericton, the first woman to hold this position. She was re-elected in 2021 to continue this important work and face the challenges of our time. She got involved in politics because of her children and their future, and because as a teacher at George Street Middle School, at Ridgeview Middle School, at FHS and at OHS, but not at Leo Hayes on the north side, I guess. She saw firsthand the need for quality education, including childcare and mental health support. She ran because she believes there is no relationship more important than the relationship with the First Nations, and that we need to do more as a partner in reconciliation. She put her name forward because we're in a climate emergency and we need to be doing everything we can to tackle climate crisis. Her goal is to always work collaboratively and inclusively to advance solutions for the well-being of everyone. And I can certainly personally attest that Jenica has been both an active and a very accessible Member of Parliament since the day she was elected. So we thank you for that. And Jenica, I turn the mic to you.
Oh, well, thank you so much, Krista. It's always a pleasure to join the Chamber, for these events. You cover so many different topics as well. And so this is great to add my friend and colleague, Minister Fraser, with us here today. So I'll just give you a kind of some remarks a bit about his background as well. But I'd just like to start by saying it's been an honor to be part of our Atlantic Caucus in particular, and to have Minister Fraser be part of that team is really beneficial for me as well, because I often have that direct link, and he gets lots of questions from us here in Fredericton all the time. So it's just been a pleasure to get to know you. And so Minister Fraser grew up in Pictou County, Nova Scotia. He was first elected as Member of Parliament for Central Nova in 2015. But before entering politics, Minister Fraser had a successful legal career with one of Canada's top-ranked law firms, where he practiced commercial litigation and international dispute resolution. I would have thought his previous career would have been in basketball with his height, but I would be wrong about that one. Minister Fraser holds a law degree from Dalhousie University, a master's degree in public international law from Leiden University in the Netherlands, and a Bachelor of Science from St. Francis Xavier University. So prior to being appointed Minister of Immigration, Refugees and Citizenship, he previously served many roles as Parliamentary Secretary, including the Minister of Finance, and as Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Environment and Climate Change. It is a true pleasure to work with Minister Fraser and have someone like him who truly understands the importance of our maritime communities, of the challenges, and that may come with welcoming new Canadians among our provinces, because we have unique demographics, and I think that's critically important to the growth plan that we have here in the Atlantic region. So please join me in warmly welcoming Minister Fraser.
Sorry, thank you. I wasn't able to unmute myself here. It's I made the mistake of turning my sound off earlier, and I didn't have that functionality. Jenica, thank you for the kind introduction. And let me say, folks, that you've got an absolute rock star of a Member of Parliament in Fredericton. She's a pleasure to work with. And just to have the perspective of another relatively young Member of Parliament sitting around our caucus table making contributions on issues that matter to people in Atlantic Canada is just so encouraging. When she asked me to come and join the Chamber, if I could do a session on immigration, and particularly the impact that immigration has on businesses in the community, I wanted to jump at the opportunity to say yes. Thank you as well to our host at the Chamber for having me again. I appreciate that you reminded everyone, including me, of my last visit here. And let me just say that this sort of strategy of collaboration is one that is so valuable. When I was working on the finance portfolio, a lot of people, I would say, were fairly happy with the economic response to COVID-19 that allowed businesses and households to stay afloat, so they would still be here for the economic recovery, which is now underway. But those ideas weren't generated in boardrooms in Ottawa with the doors closed. In fact, hardly anybody was in Ottawa back in those days. But they came from conversations with people in communities who were actually struggling with the lived reality of the pandemic on their business, on their career. And by taking the feedback that came not only from the Fredericton Chamber, but from other business organizations and employers right across Canada, it became apparent to me early on that the needs were strikingly similar in New Brunswick as they were in Nova Scotia and Ontario and British Columbia and everywhere in between. And to have that real-time feedback from people who use the programs the government was creating is something that served us well. And I want to continue that opportunity to solicit feedback from the Canadian public because I've seen the value it provides. So first and foremost, thank you. And there was a joke made, you can't tell how tall I am about my basketball career. Sitting down on a Zoom meeting, you may not notice, but I'm 6'7" and used to be a half decent basketball player, but I broke my ankle six times by the time I was 19 years old. So I had to hang up the sneakers a little bit early. Look, we're not here to talk about my lost dreams to be an NBA All-Star, but instead my career of choice, which is really today on immigration. And hard to imagine an issue that's more important to the Atlantic Canadian economy and to the strength of our communities. I was absolutely thrilled when I found out this was the job I was going to be given. I think the first words out of my mouth when the Prime Minister told me he was going to throw a monkey wrench into my family plans of hanging out with my 8-month-old here and my 6-year-old daughter whose birthday is today. And he said, I want you to be Canada's Minister of Immigration. And my immediate reaction was to say, well, that's a bigger job than I thought you were going to give me today. And the next response out of his mouth, he said, Sean, it's no coincidence that I've selected a Minister of Immigration from a small town in Atlantic Canada. We've had successive immigration ministers from Toronto who understand the urban environment, the importance to different diaspora communities of immigration. But as we seek to rebound from this pandemic, as we have job opportunities right across the country and services in bigger cities are becoming more and more strained, it's really important that we look for opportunities to bring newcomers to smaller communities and regions that may historically not have benefited from immigration the same way that some of those larger cities have. When I look at the opportunity that immigration presents, whether it's from an economic, a demographic, or a social point of view, it's very clear to me that immigration is going to be a major part, perhaps the major part of the economic recovery from COVID-19. I'm very pleased right now with the economic recovery that Canada has seen from the pandemic, though it can always be stronger. As of the jobs report that came out for the month of February with 337,000 new jobs created across the country, and look, it may be a little bit inflated because that's a lot of the jobs that were shut down during Omicron bouncing back, but it's a seriously large number. That puts us in a position where we've now seen about 112% of the jobs lost during the pandemic have been recovered, compared just for the sake of having a comparator group. In the United States, the figure is about 90%. Despite the fact that Canada has had potentially the strongest jobs recovery of any developed economy in the world from the COVID-19 pandemic, before the Omicron variant hit us, there was over 900,000 job vacancies. And I'm going to go ahead and assume that if you walk down a random street in Fredericton, it's the same as every other community I've visited over the last number of months. There's a lot of help wanted signs in the windows. When I first got elected, the biggest conversation was, how are you going to bring jobs to the area? And the question has suddenly pivoted to say, how are you going to get workers here? When I see us to the opportunity before us, despite the challenges that a labor shortage present, it strikes me that if we have a welcoming community that's willing to take workers from another country or another place, we have the opportunity to turn that 112% of jobs recovered into a much, much bigger figure. If we can add hundreds of thousands of workers to the economy to help businesses grow, we're going to be able to bust out of this pandemic recession more quickly than anyone thought possible and start experiencing growth rates that pre-pandemic simply weren't possible to even conceive of. This is going to be good for businesses who will grow. It's going to make wages more competitive for workers. And largely speaking, it's going to help boost our productivity. But it's not just an economic argument that we need to talk about. We also need to consider the demographics. I remember back in the 2015 campaign when I was first knocking on doors in my own community, two of the big issues that we came across involved that were very local in nature, involved the closure of a local elementary school and the loss of the mental health unit at our largest regional hospital in my constituency. I remember a big theme of my campaign at the time was creating opportunities so more of our young people could move back home. I had been living out west for a while, working in a law firm. Two of my older sisters had moved to Ontario. Two of my younger sisters became teachers, one of whom who actually moved to Rossay, and another who took time off teaching so she could raise her kids while her husband worked overseas. And my youngest sister, I got a lot of sisters. There's five sisters in the family. The youngest one had to move to the city for work. And had you asked us 10 years prior, what do we want to do when we grow up? None of us would have known the answer, but we all would have wanted to be around home. That wasn't possible for virtually any of us. When I hear the introduction of Jenica saying she's raising her kids in the community where she grew up, suddenly that's become a bigger option because we've embraced growth strategies that include immigration. Because when we bring newcomers to the area, we don't just welcome those individuals, we create opportunities for businesses who've had the sort of Damocles hanging over their neck over the past 2 years. And all the workers who work for those businesses have been uncertain as to whether their employer would still be sticking around. When we have workers show up from somewhere else, those businesses can stay open and they sustain job opportunities for people who've lived in our communities for generations. When I talk to people in my community now about the biggest challenges, they ask if we can build housing enough to accommodate all the people who've moved to the East Coast over the last couple of years. And that's a challenge too, but I can tell you it is a much better challenge to have that you need to build more houses to accommodate so many people coming in than the fact that you could be facing schools and hospitals closing because so many people are leaving. The reality over the past few years is we've seen our communities embrace immigration out of necessity. If you go back to the 1970s, Canada had about 7 workers for every retiree. Today, there's about 3. By the time Jenica and I are ready to retire, on the current trajectory, we're going to have 2. If we want to continue to count on access to schools and hospitals and public transit and water and wastewater infrastructure and all of the things that I think we take for granted too often, we're going to need to grow our population in a way that actually brings more young families into our community. It's really important that we focus on this, but the benefits are innumerable. When I go to the farmers market in Pictou County, Nova Scotia today, I get to experience the culture and taste the food from India, the Philippines, Canada, the United States, different countries throughout Europe. And it makes my community a more vibrant and dynamic place to live. It's the kind of thing where success breeds success. When people see that you've got these institutions, dining options, cool job opportunities that pop up that are started by entrepreneurs from all over the world, more people want to come out here. We have an incredible product to offer. And right now, the world is making decisions about where to live and work based on the quality of life we can provide. And people want to see a diverse range of experiences in small communities and big cities. And my view is that by embracing immigration, we can provide that experience. Look, I didn't want to make my opening remarks about all the details around policies that we can deal with. I'd rather save that for the conversation. But I would point you in one direction in particular. It's no coincidence that the levels plan that I tabled in the House of Commons a few weeks ago, probably a month and a half ago now, is the most ambitious levels plan in Canada's history. Our focus as a government is to bring more people here to help our economy grow and to help our communities succeed. Some work still needs to be done to make sure people get to the communities that have the absorptive capacity to handle them, that they find jobs that are not just the only job available, but the best job to sustain communities. And those are the kinds of things that we work very hard on right now. Whether it's our permanent residency plans, the changes we can make to temporary programs to get workers here quickly. Very interested in the feedback that you have today. So let's keep this conversation open beyond the meeting today, because I don't have a monopoly on good ideas. And I think the greatest strength that I might bring to the table is understanding that good ideas come from the people who use our programs, not the people who create them. So I'll leave my remarks there for the day and just let you know how grateful I am that you've made time for me, because I find these sessions immensely valuable, and I'm so happy to be here. Jenica, thanks again for the invitation, and I look forward to the conversation very much.
Well, thank you very much, Minister, for your comments and your encouraging remarks about the lifestyle and the ability to attract people to our region. We believe the same thing. And as I mentioned, we have had many questions submitted in advance of this event. So I'm going to work our way through some of them, but we will be submitting these questions to your office in writing so that you'll have a chance to even more thoroughly answer them back to our members. So we appreciate that. I'm going to start out with a I guess, a bit of a tough one. We have people whose applications for permanent residence, study permits, work permits, and spousal work permits have been delayed beyond normal processing times. What do you believe is the biggest cause of this, and what is the plan to improve processing time going forward?
Look, great question. And you may say it's a tough question, but I have what I hope is a good answer for it. So let's talk about where the challenge comes from, because if you're going to solve the problem, you have to understand the nature of the challenge. There is, although there are a dozen reasons why we're facing certain challenges today, there's one glaringly obvious one. I cannot tell you how hard COVID-19 hit our immigration system in Canada. It was jaw-dropping when I understood the impact of the pandemic on immigration. There's two ways, chiefly, that the COVID-19 pandemic hampered our immigration system. The first was it impacted our operational capacity. The second, it interrupted the way that we moved people towards permanent residency. On our operational capacity, the impacts on our different offices around the world were unique based on the public health circumstances facing the particular jurisdiction. So our Delhi office, for example, historically one of our busiest offices, was closed repeatedly through the pandemic due to local public health measures. And we don't have the capacity in other parts of the world to let people work from home the same way we were able to do so in Canada. This meant that we actually had less horsepower in many of our offices around the world, and to some extent in Canada, particularly where there were in-person appointments required, such as an interview, for example, or to physically pick up a certain card if you were someone where we didn't know if you were in Canada, that kind of thing. Even as recently as December, the Omicron variant caused us to cancel 3,000 in-person appointments due to the local public health situation in Ontario. The other way that it hampered our capacity as a department had to do with a decision we took when the border was closed last year. At the same time, we were trying to welcome the largest number of permanent residents in Canada's history. And we were successful. We made a decision at the time that was the right decision, but it created consequences that we are dealing with now. The decision that was taken was to pivot towards resettling people as permanent residents who were already in Canada on a temporary basis. We did this so we could provide certainty to employers, provide an opportunity to meet our targets of increasing the population of Canada through permanent residency. But it created a situation where we continued to see enormous numbers of applications from people who were in another country who wanted to come to Canada at a time when we were disproportionately welcome people who were in the country already. This has created a situation where we have a couple years worth of applications that are in the system right now that we have to work through before we get back to what will feel ordinary. Now, that's the nature of the challenge. So what are we doing to fix it? There's a number of different things. If I could boil it down to just a couple of things, it's resources, technology, and spaces. So first on resources, we hired more than 500 new staff who are processing people right now and are fully trained up. And we're starting to see that those investments pay dividends. In the economic and fiscal update, we put another $85 million. It's going to specifically target PR cards, proof of citizenship, temporary residency visas, study permits, and work permits. And that money is going to be rolling out over the course of this year. On the technology side, we are in the midst of the biggest digital revolution in terms of our processing capacity in our department, in the department's history. This is an $827 million investment to adopt a digital system for immigration in Canada. One of the challenges that we have, if you go through an MP's office, 80% of the calls that go through MP's office are for status updates. What we find is when you call the department, you can't get an answer. You call your MP, they call the department calls somebody in an office on the other side of the world. And because it's a paper-based system, somebody in that office on the other side of the world has to go pull the file, read the information, call back someone in the department who gives an update to the MP, who can then update their constituent. It's crazy to me. We launched the first PR case tracker that you can access on your phone in February, which will cut out all of those steps in the interim. We're now adopting a digital application process that'll have 17 different immigration streams that will be able to take applications digitally by this summer. The end game here is to have the entire system digitized, so we're not only dealing with smoother updates and application processes, but also have the ability when the London office is at capacity, maybe our Delhi office, when it's operational, can actually pick up the slack to be processing applications that they can actually access on their computer, which today they can't. This is a really big game changer. It's going to take a couple of years to digitize the entire system. We do already have new functionalities that have come online today, and we will have more over the months ahead. So we've covered resources, we've covered technology. The final thing we need to do is increase our spaces. A lot of people say, well, can you just process everything that's in the queue first before you look at growing your numbers in order to process things faster? And the answer is that would be a terrible idea. If we respond to our processing challenges by limiting the number of people who can come in, we will be missing out on talent like you wouldn't believe. And it would actually delay the problem. We need to actually open the doors more broadly, so more of those people who are in the queue that have made an application over the last couple of years can fit in each year. So my ambition is to continue to grow those levels, to advance the digitization of the system, and continue to put more resources into the system, whether it's in terms of investments in tech or hiring more people to process cases. These investments are starting to pay off already. In the first 2 months of the year, we've seen more than 100,000 applications for permanent residency approved, which puts us way ahead of schedule. We tried to front end load it when we saw what was coming through the situation in Ukraine, because it will have a short-term impact while we wait for the new money for Ukraine to sort of backfill whatever resource gap we have. But we are really starting to see these new people and new technologies deployed in a way that's boosting our capacity already. And in the months and years ahead, I expect to see that continue.
We'd like to do our part to help you in that regard. And I want to tell you that Fredericton is what's considered a smart city. So we have a lot of technology capability here. We have a lot of great people here, and we'd love to see you open an IRCC processing office here in Fredericton. What do you say to that?
My temptation is to say I'd like to see one everywhere. One of the challenges that I have right now is when I asked the same question about whether we could have more localized presences in different communities. And this is something that our department's been looking at for a number of years. And sometimes it's different communities in Canada, sometimes it's different countries around the world. When we pivot to a digital technology, I'm open to the idea of having staff work in areas where they can be accessed. But when we stand up physical offices, one of the things that we see is huge losses in efficiency, and it tends to delay the system for just about everybody. There are some efficiencies that are gained when you have a local person who understands people in the local community, but across the immigration system, the more offices that we have, the slower the overall processing time works. So my head is in the space right now to say, let's open the door to having people work from wherever they have access to an internet connection, but run it through a centrally managed system rather than having a series of different locations, which are still taking in new paper applications, because it tends to slow things down a lot more than I would have thought was the case. So my sense, since we're moving towards this new and digital world, is to look at what we can do to allow people to work potentially in Fredericton, but run it through a centrally managed digital system so we can take advantage of the opportunities when one area may be slow, the other may be quicker. I should point out, though not Fredericton, I might create some challenges within the province. I know Minister LeBlanc Mendocino before me had discussed a center for primarily for Francophone newcomers based in, I believe it was in Dieppe. And that's sort of a conversation we're still having about properly funding and what role that space could take on to serve the broader population in New Brunswick is a live conversation. So anyway, that's where my head is at. No big announcement for you today, I'm afraid, but that's to give you a window into my own thinking. That's sort of the thought process that I have.
Krista, just on that piece, here at my office, we've got an extra space we'd love to share. So it wouldn't be about the bricks and mortar.
Right on. And it was worth the ask, Minister, and whatever way that we could help here in Fredericton, we also have welcomed many remote workers and people who have chosen to move to Fredericton and work for companies across the country. So we can certainly do the same for your team as well, and welcome them to our beautiful city. I'm going to move on to the next question. This question is from the University of New Brunswick. spouses of international students can qualify for an open work permit for the duration of the study permit. However, the work permits are no longer valid when the international student graduates, so a spouse must then apply for an open work permit. In many cases, these aren't approved until the student can produce 3 consecutive pay stubs in a job meeting the required NOC codes. So that could mean an interruption in household income because the student is seeking permanent employment and the person who's earning and supporting the household ends up not being able to work. Can this policy be reviewed to allow spouses to continue to work and support the household for an appropriate period while a new graduate is working to secure employment?
Look, everything is possible from my perspective. And I'm always interested in finding what more we can do here. One of the challenges that we'll have is that we still need to make sure that people who are applying qualify for admissibility to Canada. And if there are challenges around a person that may not have the ability to sustain themselves, that may not be likely to go home and is seeking to sneak in as a permanent resident rather than come in on a temporary work basis, then we would direct them to apply through a different program. But I'm always interested in not working against myself. And right now, it is a top priority for me to get workers here and allow them to stay. So there's a couple of things that I would point to. I think when the student is trying to produce pay stubs, counseling potential or students who potentially want to stay for a longer period to apply early for postgraduate work permits is really, really essential. Some of the folks can help themselves more than I think they realize. And we need to probably continue to improve the way that we communicate how to make sure you don't limit your ability to stay. Of course, you can apply as a spouse for a visitor's visa, for a spousal open work permit, for a study permit if they also want to go to school, whatever the case may be. I've been bitten by this in another country myself. I myself was an international student in the Netherlands, as Jenica mentioned during the my intro, and there was a challenge with the immigration files in the Netherlands that my wife ran into that caused us to be separated for a significant period of time when she wasn't allowed to return in due to some of the challenging rules that we had in place. We got sorted, but it took months and it impacted her ability to work as well. So I'm sympathetic to it. I just want to make sure that we encourage people to use the systems that are in place, because I find when people do qualify and they apply early enough, you tend not to run into some of these challenges. But if there are concrete suggestions on how we can more easily grant access to open work permit programs, I'm very interested. I should mention, though, not specific to the spouses of students, there's a whole suite of measures I'm looking at right now that are going to make it hopefully more easy for people to come and take advantage of temporary work permits, including reducing the barriers for LMIAs, which of course for a spousal open work permit isn't a factor, but for other workers it would be. Whether it's looking at the hours that international students can work, whether it's looking at the percentage of a workforce that could be temporary foreign workers. There's 8 or 12 different policies we're looking at right now to try to really make it easier for employers to access talent, at least in the short term, because these are not ordinary circumstances we're living through. And if I can use your suggestion on the spousal open work permit in my next conversation as we develop this strategy, it may be one more arrow in the quiver we can pull out to ensure we don't interrupt businesses' access to talent that they need.
Thank you so much for that. And a great segue to my next question for you. So our chamber has advocated, and we've actually gained the support of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce for more opportunities for international students to gain Canadian work experience while they're in school. And of course, this would not only help fill the labor gap, but also it really improves our chances of retaining them post-graduation. And there's 2 things that we've specifically asked for. We would like to see international students qualify for the Canada Summer Jobs Program and the Student Work Placement Programs, participating in voluntary co-op terms and internships without obtaining separate work permits. And also make permanent and remove sectoral and industry restrictions for the temporary pandemic-related measures that allowed students to work more than 20 hours per week off campus. So where are you on those issues that our chamber has received national support on?
So in the short term, there's two different time periods I'm looking at. In the short term, I'm looking right now at that very specific suggestion on the hours that international students can work. I'm in a mood these days to do whatever I can to get workers to businesses as quickly as possible. The reason that I feel that way is we are still living through an economic crisis. Although a lot of people have gotten their job back, some sectors have been absolutely punished. And it's one thing to say that 112% of the jobs are recovered across the economy. That is cold comfort to a tourism operator in Atlantic Canada these days. They need bodies and they need them, and it's going to help spur economic growth in our region. So in the short term, I'm in a mood to do whatever I can. I have some concerns about the hours that students work in the long term. And my specific concern is related to really serious abuse of the program and abuse of the students who do arrive in Canada when they are told that they can come here and work as much as they want. One of the things, and it's sort of a dirty secret of the international students program. Within Canada, the practices aren't as bad. There's a new college of immigration consultants that's regulated, and it's a profession that can enforce against bad actors with some real efficacy. One of the huge problems I deal with is promoters of Canada's immigration problem who are working in the country of origin of prospective applicants. When we increase the hours a student can work, it becomes a carrot that these bad actors use to defraud students like you wouldn't believe, by giving them fake letters of acceptance to institutions that have no idea the student is interested in coming. They get them through Canada's immigration system as international students under the promise that they can work. And when they don't have access to a legitimate study opportunity because they've come here under the guise of being able to work, they end up not having a work permit that they can use. And the mental health concerns, including quite a number of people in Canada who are committing self-harm, is a much bigger problem than people realize. Study permits are still intended for people who come with the intent to study at a designated learning institution. If we want to create more flexibility so they can work as we deal with the labor shortage, then that's awesome. If we want to do it on a permanent basis and create an actual another economic stream, I would say, let's grow the economic streams we have for people who are coming here to work. But in the short term, all bets are off because we need to get workers here more quickly and more easily. We've got longer term policy work to do. I should say as well, though, just because it's related, though not perfectly on point, there's another mandate letter commitment that the Prime Minister's asked me to do, which is to create a more reliable pathway to permanent residency for international students and temporary foreign workers specifically. There's a private member's motion that's been tabled in the House of Commons. It's motion 44. It comes from our colleague Randeep Sarai from British Columbia, if you want to look into it. And it's something that we do intend to do. So even the people who are coming here with some limitations on their ability to work will have some better pathway to permanent residency where we can address challenges around the buildup of hours required for different programs. The first question you asked was on Canada summer jobs. Again, in the short term, I'm willing to look at things a little bit more flexibly. It's not lost on me that we need to maintain the public support for a lot of these programs. In a context when there is an intense labor shortage, it's a lot easier. A permanent change to the Canada Summer Jobs program that would open it up to international students without an LMIA has the potential to be one of those things where people start to say, are you providing fewer opportunities for people who've lived in our community since forever to take advantage of these jobs? Are you going to be suppressing wages? And I'm always very sensitive because I feel very lucky that my biggest problem as immigration minister in Canada is that I can't get newcomers here quickly enough. That always hangs on the balance, and we are one bad story or one terrible noisemaker in politics away from having that narrative shift towards people saying, hey, we're not as supportive as newcomers as we used to be. And when you start to tap into something like the Canada Summer Jobs program, it does create certain other challenges. I always think to myself as well, the purpose of the Canada Summer Jobs program, as great as it is for employers, it was designed as a means to give work experience to students who are going to be here. So if it's a student who's on a pathway to permanent residency, I've got no reservations because we're going to be developing this person's skill and having them join the workforce force on a permanent basis, presumably. If it's somebody who's going to be here just during their period of study and is going to be taking that work experience and then having their home country benefit, I'm less interested, because the purpose of the program is to develop those skills that will make a contribution to our economy in the long term, not just to fill a short-term gap in the labor force.
I appreciate that answer. And one thing I would say is that as employers, many do not differentiate between an international student and a domestic student. We see them as wonderfully talented students of our institutes of higher learning. And so if it's a post-secondary student that has the skills that we want, as employers, I think employers would want to see them be able to take advantage of the Canada Summer Jobs Program. And I guess if you're talking too about adding some new flexibility as to how we can have students be more interested and able to stay, a couple of other suggestions we would have would be to allow part-time studies to count towards postgraduate work permit eligibility, and count all time spent in Canada as an international student towards their citizenship eligibility as well. Right now it's half-time, that could be increased. So those are a couple of options you might want to consider in your deliberations. The next comment is, and we've talked about this some, but maybe asking for a little more specific answers too. This is from a newcomer business owner who asks, my question to the minister and to our MP is about the shortage of workforce and what is the plan to solve the issue? With the pandemic and the fact that most companies in the major cities are offering remote working options, New Brunswick companies could lose talent who we already had difficulty attracting and retaining in New Brunswick. What's the potential for international students to fill that gap? And what policies could we put in place to get them to stay, like fast tracking their immigration, some of the things we've just talked about? What about tax breaks if they promise to work so many years? What are some ideas in that regard?
This could take all day, so I'm going to be careful. This is one of my favorite subjects. And look, forgive me if I go a little bit beyond international students specifically, but my goal right now in the short term is to find a way to make it easier for you to find a person that can work for your business and hire them. This is going to require, depending on whether you're dealing with students, temporary foreign workers, permanent residents, a different approach on different policy angles. But the overarching theme, regardless of which stream we're looking at, is how can I make it easier for a person to get here and for a business to hire that person? So a couple of things. We're working right now with the province of New Brunswick to develop a trusted employer stream that will allow the people who we have faith will treat their employees with respect and provide basic, decent working conditions, take care of them from a housing point of view, et cetera, to actually severely reduce the administrative barriers around the LMIA process, for example, whether it's dealing with fees or period of stay or the actual application process. For people who are routinely hiring the same folks back, we want to make that very easy. For remote work, that's actually a massive opportunity for us. I would prefer, rather than have the business hire somebody who can work remotely when they're not in their study period, is to have people move to our community so they're not just working for a local business, but spending the money that they earn in our communities. In fact, it might be even better if we attract people to stay here and work for a business in another country so we can be importing dollars into our community as a massive growth strategy. So the kinds of things that are under consideration right now, and look, don't take any of these to be foregone conclusions because they're very much live conversations, are everything from reducing administrative barriers for the LMIA process, to increasing the number of hours international students can work, to increasing the percentage of a workforce that a business can use for temporary foreign workers. If we're going to make changes like that, we have to marry it to a pathway to permanent residency for students. I'm immensely frustrated that we've got these people who are permanently on a temporary status, and the temporary foreign workers program has now been used to fill permanent gaps in the labor force, and it's not an efficient way for businesses to find workers, and it's a really complicated and challenging way for workers to live their lives as well. There's a number of other measures that we're looking at to see if we can make it easier to hire people, looking at pivoting in certain sectors where we know that there is immense labor shortages towards multiple employer work permits within a sector, for example. These are the kinds of things that we're considering right now to try to just make it easier. But my sense, more than any of these specific measures, if I can leave you with sort of my guiding principle, it's that we really need to make it easier to get people here quickly and have them start working. It's going to require, in addition, a lot of additional resources towards the processing of these applications. So we don't have businesses that are hiring people 10, 11 months out, but can actually get workers when they need workers. But these are sort of a few of the different things that we're working on along these lines to make it easier. But the big thing just on international students, the pathway to permanent residency is going to be a big part of it. I think if we can solve that problem, my reservations around hours worked, counting hours towards citizenship, whatever it may be, they start to melt away. International students make some of the very best permanent residents when you look at the social and economic outcomes. And if we can make sure that we're dealing with people that plan to stay in Canada and that we want to have stay, a lot of my other concerns around program integrity melt away, because they're designed to protect against pouring a lot of our time, energy, and money into bringing someone up to the standard we would hope them to be able to meet for local employers, only to have them go make contributions to some other country's economy. So trying to make sure we create a pathway, not just to get them here temporarily, but allow them to make a permanent contribution to Canada is something that we're working on literally as we speak.
When you talk about processing times, one of the programs that's really important to us here in Fredericton is the Startup Visa Program, because it allows entrepreneurs to get a temporary work permit and permanent residency at the same time. And that's so that they can get their business going without having to wait for a PR taking a long time. But since 2019, the work permit applications have been taking up to 18 months to be processed, and PR applications are taking more than 2 years. So how do you suggest that we overcome this hurdle so that we can streamline the Startup Visa Program and get people able to participate more quickly?
So there's a couple things that I think I need to do, and there's other things that I think chambers can do, and provincial governments and municipalities to try to sort of coach people into these processes. First, I think there is a question of resources that we need to deploy internal to the department. I do have faith that the recent injection of $85 million going in part towards work permits is going to make a difference. You're testing my memory a little bit right now. I think the average processing time for work permits is down to 85 days. The standard should have us at a 60-day turnaround, but it's creeping back toward that service standard. And depending on how severe the impact of our Ukraine operations are on processing times, we do anticipate to get back to service standard of 60 days this year, but we'll wait and see what events may intervene. The other thing that really frustrates me about the Startup Visa Program, and we've not made this change yet, but I'll give you a window into where my mind is at. It's fairly restrictive in the number of the types of businesses that have access to it. If you're running an innovative tech business, no problem, great program for you, and we should look at expanding the numbers because the people who come through that stream make an immense contribution. But right now, one of the things that I see as a massive opportunity is there's people from all over the world who are reassessing what they want to do and where they want to live. And they may have a business that is scalable beyond compare to anything in our communities today, but it might be in a more traditional manufacturing business. It might be in some other industry that's not within the narrow boundaries of the Startup Visa Program. So my own thoughts right now is that we should broaden the eligibility criteria of the program. We should add additional resources to process work permits more quickly. And then on the chamber side, if I could be so bold as to make a suggestion, should we get through those policy changes that I would like to see in increasing the ambition and eligibility requirements of the program, to have missions go out to target entrepreneurs that we want to come bring to our communities. There is a massive advantage for Atlantic Canada right now. I bumped into someone who works for New York's Google office in the community of Caribou in Pictou County, Nova Scotia. And I said, why in the name of God are you here? And they said, because I could find a waterfront home for $280,000 and have access to what feels like a private beach, even though it's a public beach. And people around the world are making those kinds of decisions left and right now. And we have to be here with our hand up saying, we got a pretty cool product to offer. And if you want to come and hire a dozen locals and do your business here, we're going to blow the doors wide open for you. So that's what my attitude is toward this. Now, the challenge is always on implementation. If I can be totally honest with you, I don't think we're going to get there on the startup visa program in this calendar year. I think if we get the policy work done to broaden the eligibility criteria this year, it's the kind of thing that could start seeing people land in calendar year 2023. I would love to say, hey, we can move quicker and get through things. But when I look at the challenges before me on a whole suite of other policy areas that are very, very urgent, I think we're probably looking at the best case scenario, having this be a part of the 2023 immigration levels plan.
Thank you very much. And that is great food for thought too, as to how we as a community can, if you're able to broaden that startup visa program, how we can attract even more. I have so many questions from students and from the university, and we have a great relationship with the New Brunswick Student Alliance and with the universities here. I'm going to ask one more student question, then I have a question with regards to people coming from Ukraine. So my last question with regards to student is, when a prospective international student has their application for a study permit rejected, the information given is often insufficient for them to know the exact issue with their application, and also insufficient to allow representatives from the post-secondary institution to help them with advice or guidance. Is it possible to provide more particular individual information when rejecting a study permit that would allow corrections to be made or additional information that could be submitted?
So the answer is yes. How we do it is create certain different consequences. And one of the things that we see that I really wasn't aware before I became the minister in this portfolio of how large a problem fraud in the immigration system really is. One of the things that we see, and I hate to acknowledge it this way, but realistically, the vast majority of people who apply to Canada are honest people who just want to come to Canada, work, and make a difference. There are an awful lot of people who are trying to sell a bill of goods to folks that would be happy to come to Canada, but don't realize that they're being taken advantage of. When it comes to the reasons for refusal, particularly if somebody's working with a promoter who lives in a third country, one of the things we see is they very quickly tailor their application to make it look like they've satisfied requirements that in fact are not satisfied. One of the challenges that we see in certain countries is we've got these promoters who say on the proof of funds requirement to show that you can support yourself when you get here, is they'll find 20 different people and they will have the same funds in one person's account. They'll submit their application, transfer the same $10,000 to the next person's account, and repeat that over and over and over. And you end up having large numbers of people who apply to come to Canada, none of whom have the financial capacity because this is the kind of practice that that rolls out. That's just one example of the kinds of things that we try to protect against. And when you provide a huge amount of specificity beyond sort of the category of reasons why you may not have come, anybody who's working with one of these bad actors learns very, very quickly how to overcome the analysis without solving the substantive underlying concern for the rejection. And I would love to be able to provide clearer guidance, and figuring out how to do that without compromising the integrity of the process is a challenge. I have had some early conversations with the department about this, because there's a lot of people, particularly when they come from a country where English is their second language, even though they meet the language standards. We do find that it's a breakdown in communication that leads to an incomplete application, rather than the fact that they actually don't meet the substantive requirements. And if we can provide more guidance to people in that circumstance, I would love to, but figuring out how to do it without compromising on the integrity side is one of the challenges that I wrestle with. I think you said you had a question on Ukraine as well before we wrap. Is that right?
I do. And I have many more questions. We're here as long as you can be here. But I do know that you have an engagement with Charlottetown immediately following. So this question is actually from the Executive Director of the Multicultural Association of Fredericton, Lisa Bamford. And she asks, questions have been raised regarding access to provincial health care for Ukrainians coming through the Canada-Ukraine authorization for emergency travel. Most will be seniors, women, and children who might not see themselves as requiring work permits and might not check the box to request a work permit. We've been told in the past movements, it was possible to provide work permits with the application. Is that being considered to ensure that those arriving will have access to provincial health care?
Yes, I'll be more specific in my response though. We built into the application form a person fills out the opportunity to apply for a work permit or a study permit for that matter. Those who take us up on the work permit, as I think the questioner understands, just given the way it was asked, automatically qualify for provincial healthcare systems. We're seeing, just to put it into perspective, we had, as of a couple days ago, there was about 250 Ukrainians arrived in Canada since January 1st. There was about 9,500 who had applied under the old system before Thursday that came online that are being processed on an expedited basis. Between Thursday and Sunday, we saw approximately 20,000 applications under the new system. Of the 20,000, more than 80% did apply for the open work permit as well. And I expect that I breathed a sigh of relief when I saw that, both because of the pressures on the healthcare system, but also because it demonstrates to me that a lot of the people who are coming, though we haven't seen the exact demographic profile yet, are going to be people who are expecting that they may want to work. And I was very concerned, given the demographic of people who are leaving Ukraine right now, being disproportionately women with young children who've just been through a very traumatic experience, and elderly people who may not be coming to work, but purely to seek refuge. In addition to the open work permit, though, we are having conversations with settlement agencies, with provincial governments, with nonprofits, and we're trying right now to solve this problem, not just on healthcare, but on accommodations, on transportation through airports, on general settlement supports, language training, etc. And I think you can appreciate we're doing something in a matter of weeks that is typically an effort of this size would usually be like a 4 or 5 year commitment. We're trying to do this as quickly as possible. We've had 3 provinces come out and say already, for those who don't have work permits, we're going to cover healthcare. And frankly, it's going to be a big draw for BC, Alberta, and Quebec if other provinces don't follow suit, because people are going to go there and they're going to benefit from the population growth that attaches to it. That said, the conversations have gone very well with all provinces. Everybody's got this Team Canada approach. I actually spoke with your Premier this morning as part of the Council of Atlantic Premiers, and we did discuss immigration as a major priority area, including a short conversation about Ukraine. There are also more aspects to come out as part of this response, including a centrally coordinated portal for, I mentioned the jobs for Ukraine previously, but also for the goodwill we're seeing coming from Canadians, whether it's people who want to volunteer a spare apartment they may have, or people who have winter jackets to give to kids, whatever it may be. We're working with nonprofit partners who have expertise in both logistics and housing to try to actually tap into the goodwill of Canadians along these lines. The health piece is obviously going to be a conversation between us and provincial governments, but on the goodwill more broadly, we're working around the clock to try to sort out how we can capitalize on the extraordinary outpouring of goodwill we're seeing from Canadian communities.
So we are at 12:59. Do you want to take one more question, or do you want to tie it up now?
No, I can take one more. I think that they gave us about 5 minutes of a grace period here, expecting that we would go over. So I think we've got a team who's planned for all inevitabilities.
So this is a question that is not under federal jurisdiction, but we're looking for your advice. The idea of granting the right to vote to immigrants, particularly permanent residents, isn't new. In Canada, New Brunswick had already come out in favor of it, and permanent residents were once allowed to vote in municipal elections, but that ended in 1998. So over the last couple of years, municipal, provincial, business leaders, and many New Brunswickers, including our chamber, have been working together to make this change happen in New Brunswick. There have been many public dialogues with leaders in other parts of Canada who want the same thing. So my question is, or I guess it's not my question, but it's actually the question of the co-chair of our Immigration Advocacy Committee, Asif Hassan. The question is, do you believe permanent residents should have the right to vote in municipal elections? And if yes, what do you think that we could do to make this a reality and to make their voice heard and valued so that PRs can really feel that they belong?
This is a great question, and it's killing me that my wife is not standing beside me because she's doing her PhD right now on the law of democracy and the voting rights of Canadians, more specifically. And I feel like if I could yell and get her out of her meeting right now to come and do this, that would be great. So look, long story short, the federal voting rights are tied to citizenship, and I'm comfortable with that right now. But I do struggle because the principle underlying our democracy is you should be able to have a say in selecting your leaders if you're impacted by the decisions that your leaders take. At a municipal level, when I think of somebody who's paying property tax and contributing to our communities, they are impacted by urban planning decisions as much as Canadian citizens are. If it's something that you want to pursue, Jenik and I, although we can be people you can have conversations with, are not going to be able to move the needle for you. Municipalities are creatures of provincial statutes, and you would need to be able to convince the provincial government to make a legislative change that would empower municipalities to make that decision. So if I'm being honest, do I think it's going to happen anytime soon? Probably not. This issue's come up for permanent residents who live in my community now, but I can guarantee you, if you don't start talking about it, it will never happen. So if it's something you want to start pursuing, I would say start having those conversations as quickly as possible. And hopefully you can start a ball rolling that will lead to people feeling like they're better represented. This is something that the UK, I understand, allows permanent residents not just to vote, but to qualify for their national healthcare system as well, more or less, no questions asked. And it's a really big ticket item when you're looking to recruit people to say you get full participation in society, whether it's job opportunities, healthcare, the right to vote. Those are the kinds of things, when they add up, actually become a very powerful competitive advantage for communities, where people can say, look, you're not going to let me have a say in how we should design zoning practices. I'm going to go to another jurisdiction where I can actually help inform the people who are going to make decisions that allow me to grow my business. So these are not esoteric concepts that are debated in university halls alone, despite the fact that my wife is very much one of those people who's debating it in university halls. It's a really Main Street kind of question for people who are coming to set up businesses. So it's a challenging situation to wrestle through, because a lot of people become uncomfortable when you expand the pool of people who may vote, and everyone is rightfully skeptical of governments and politicians who try to expand voter bases in a way that may serve their democratic interests. So I think you'd have to put a razor sharp framework in place that would be immune to political interference. But I would suggest, if you want to pursue this, start having conversations with the provincial government ASAP. And just a quick update, I literally got a text 2 minutes ago saying the new numbers from Ukraine since January 1st are now 10,058 Ukrainians who have arrived in Canada since the beginning of the year. So the pace is a very real thing. And the sooner I sort out those settlement supports and healthcare conversations with provincial counterparts, the better off we're all going to be.
I can't thank you enough for the time that you spent with us today. I would like to allow Jenica to say a last word, and then I will turn the mic to you. So Jenica, did you have anything you wanted to add before we leave today?
Oh, well, just again, I'm so grateful for this conversation. And we've covered so many of these topics kind of, in different venues, but to have the minister, with us, you certainly can hopefully help speed some of these things up, and we can see some of that action. And I know that Mr. Fraser is committed to that change. And like I said, I'm full of optimism, and I think if anyone can do it, it will be him. But again, that Atlantic perspective, that's so important to us. And so it's a big piece that I see really moving some of the positive changes. So I took lots of notes as well. And I do just want to have one more comment about Ukraine. So if anyone is reaching out to you about, I do have an extra room, or I want to donate things, our office can help organize some of that. So please reach out at any time. We're doing everything that we can. And of course, it takes all of us. So just wanted to have that piece there as well. And thank you, Krista and the Chamber, for all that you do.
It's our pleasure, and thank you. We're always thankful for such an engaged member of Parliament that we work so closely with her and her team. Thank you, Minister Fraser, for your time and your insights today. As I mentioned at the beginning of the event, I have literally pages of questions. So we are going to forward those questions to your office so that you can have a chance to have your team work on some of those for us, and we'll be sharing those answers back to our members, and we'll be sharing this video as well. So thanks again, and thanks for all you're doing to help the newcomers in our communities to settle and have a great life here in Atlantic Canada. And whatever we can do to support that, we are a phone call, a text, an email, or any kind of message. You can reach us through Jenica or directly with our office, and we are here to support whatever we can to bring more newcomers to our community. So thanks very much.
Excellent.
Thanks,
The pleasure is all mine. And maybe on a concluding note, the number one thing you as the chamber could probably do is find your members who can hire the people who come here. I think that would make all the difference in the world. Jenica, thank you again for the invitation. Krista, real pleasure to join you. And for everyone who's joined, this has been fantastic. I look forward to our next conversation.
Thanks very much. Bye, everyone.
Everyone, have a great day.